every person who is charged with a criminal offense is entitled to defend himself in person or by a legal practitioner of his own choice.
Remember that an individual is entitled to remain silent.
Every citizen in Nigeria is entitled to maintain a private life.
You are approaching a military checkpoint or a police checkpoint without knowing that it's against or it offends them and subject you to a frog jump. That is wrong.
Hello out there, you are welcome to another fresh episode of the program Justify Nigeria on SNN Television, reaching you from Abuja. On today's episode of the program, we are going to be looking at the legal relationship between a landlord and a tenant. My name is Anozie Chinomso. Throughout the ages, it has always been the divine plan that man should dominate the world. This is because man was not only created in the image of God, but also empowered to dominate other forms of creatures. It is a common knowledge that some of the ways to dominate the world is to multiply, have and own properties. In owning a property, two parties are involved, especially when it comes to leasing the said property out, thus giving rise to a landlord and a tenant. A landlord, therefore, is an owner of a house, apartment, land, or real estate, which is rented or leased to an individual or corporate entity. While a tenant, on the other part, is a person who holds or possesses the land, real estate or property, or another by any kind of right, whether in fee simple, severalty, in a period of time for a valuable consideration, usually called rent. Suffice it to say here, for the purpose of emphasis, the majority of people do not understand the legal relationship between the landlord and the tenant. What then are those relationships? Who then is a landlord and a tenant? What is a tenancy agreement? When can it be said that someone is a tenant at will? With me in the studio to address all this is Barrister Obi Nonya, who is a senior associate at Onyechi Bazu SAN & Co. He's also a member of Unity Bar, Abuja, and member of Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. You're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
You're welcome. Every time we hear about landlord and tenants, there are some people who don't understand what this is all about. Oftentimes they say landlord, does it mean that he's a lord of a land? Please explain to the understanding of our viewers whom a landlord is, whom a tenant is.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
The term landlord means so many things, but in the context of a tenancy relationship, a landlord is that person who has what we call in law a reversionary right over a property.
Can't you speak it?
I'll break it down. So
yes.
the reversionary right means he has the power to put a person in a property and he has the power to eject that person. So the landlord is not necessarily the owner of that property. The landlord could be an agent. The landlord could be a lawyer who is managing a property.
How can an agent or somebody managing the property be a landlord?
Thank you very much. So the owner of the property will now give what we call like a power of attorney, okay, or give a consent to the it's a common practice in Abuja where you see a property being managed by an estate management firm. The occupants of the property don't know who the owner is. All they know is the person who put them in possession. So for the purpose of that tenancy relationship, their landlord is the estate manager.
All right, that's what you mean, that he's not necessarily the owner.
Yes. So it's take different forms.
So you can have a house, appoint me as an agent, maybe through power of attorney or any other legal instrument.
Exactly.
And automatically, anybody I put there sees me as the landlord.
Yes.
Not necessarily Obinna.
Exactly.
Okay.
And also, you now have power to do all the landlord can do over that property, including ejecting the person from the property. So for the purpose of that tenancy relationship, that person is the landlord.
Is the landlord. Thank you very much. Who is a tenant?
A tenant is that person who has now been put in place to hold the property temporarily, but generally, usually for a fee called rent.
Okay.
For a fee called rent, but not necessarily on rent. Okay, because we have instances where we have what's called service tenants.
Explain that.
If you work, for instance, in an organization, the organization has a housing scheme. Okay, so by virtue of your employment, you are now living in one of the staff quarters of the organization.
Okay.
So you are not necessarily paying rent, okay, but you're a tenant by reason of your employment.
Maybe some rights and privileges of where you are working.
Exactly. And when that employment ceases, automatically that tenancy will also cease. So the tenant in this case is what we call a service tenant. So it's guided. It's almost the same thing as a landlord-tenant relationship, but in this case, rent may not be paid.
Okay, let's understand it. For example, a reverend father or a priest living in a church vicarage.
Good.
So in that circumstance, that reverend father or a priest or a pastor is a tenant.
Is a tenant. And in the event that that employment that got him that appointment ceases,
maybe the bishop or whoever decides to remove him, or the church committee or whatever.
Yes, then automatically that property, he now becomes a tenant at will. We'll explain that subsequently.
Okay.
And he now has to leave
that place. So he will not say that I will still occupy that place.
He can't occupy because he's not the owner. So a tenancy is usually is a temporary arrangement. It's not a permanent one. So that's the difference between a landlord and a tenant.
Thank you very much, Barrister. Then how can a tenancy agreement be created?
This is an interesting one. You see, generally, a tenancy agreement must not be in writing. It must not be in writing. No, there's no requirement of law that it must be in writing. However, the one that must be in writing are leases. Okay, a lease is a tenancy arrangement that exceeds 3 years.
Let's come again. A lease is also a type of tenancy agreement.
Yes. So the one that is 3 years and above must be in writing.
But if it is less than 3 years,
it's a tenancy arrangement.
Okay, it's now an arrangement.
Yeah, it's a tenancy agreement.
But it can be oral.
Tenancy agreement. Yes, it can be oral.
So you can just say, no, sir, please, I want to stay in your house, and we agree.
Yes.
And it stands.
Yes.
But is it enforceable?
Very enforceable. So, but the problem with it is that Now, I take you back a bit. So the problem is that tenancy arrangements are rooted in contract, and it's generally advised that contracts should be in writing. Okay, but that a contract is not in writing does not make it unenforceable. But the issues and challenges and difficulties and misunderstandings will be substantially reduced when they are in writing. Okay, but the only type of tenancy, in quotes, which is leases, which the law requires that must be in writing, are leases above, tenancy above 3 years, which are called leases. But tenancy agreement generally must not be in writing.
Is that the one that they say is a deed? That's something that
it's done in a deed. Yes.
What's the difference between a tenancy agreement and a deed, because we are trying to enlighten our viewers that are non-lawyers so that they will know their rights. Oftentimes, you see how landlord also do away with a tenant. That's the essence of this.
A deed is generally what is called an agreement under seal. That's what a deed is, an agreement under seal. But you see, the issue of sealing has been the subject matter of several court decisions here. And there's a recent decision that says that it must not be sealed for it to be enforceable. But the most important thing which the law distinguishes a tenancy agreement from a lease is the duration.
Okay.
The duration is the difference.
The 3 years.
3 years and above, below. 3 years above must be in writing. Below must not be in writing. But the advantages of putting an agreement, a tenancy agreement under seal, it's something that is we can't start saying that you should not do. In fact, it's necessary that you put an agreement in writing. Several reasons. One of the reasons is the issue of subletting.
Okay.
Now, subletting is where a tenant is put in possession of a property.
Okay.
And then the tenant, maybe it's a 5-bedroom duplex.
Okay.
And the tenant,
we're about to go into, but since you are there, just go ahead. What is subletting? That's what you're explaining now.
I'm going into subletting.
Okay.
That's one of the reasons why you should put agreements in writing.
In writing.
The tenant now discovers that, oh, the boys' quarters is empty and I don't need it. Okay, so he took a 5-bedroom duplex with a boys' quarters. Okay, that's what he took from the landlord. Then he says, I have a boys' quarters that is empty and I want to put a tenant there and be collecting rent from the...
Even him that is a tenant?
Yes.
Is it right under law, sir?
Good. So that's what's called subletting. So in Abuja, the laws in Abuja is silent on the powers of a tenant to sublet. But in Lagos, what it says is that the tenant will not sublet without the prior consent of the landlord. Now, this is the law now covering for that space. But if there is a tenancy agreement, and in your tenancy agreement, generally, a well-prepared tenancy agreement will say that the tenant shall not sublet the property without the prior consent of the landlord. So when you put a tenancy agreement, it's there. You can't now say, oh, I want to make some money from the empty boys' quarters and then put a tenant there. You have to go and read your agreement first to check whether you have such powers. Okay? If the landlord said you shall not, then you cannot. If the landlord say you tell me first before you put a tenant, then you now write to a landlord and say, oh, I want to put a tenant in the boys' quarters. Then the landlord has to give his consent to it. Because you now find out that the situation I'm giving is a simple one. It's actually more complex than this in Abuja. For instance, in Gwarimpa Axis and some other places in Abuja, you see situations where A owns a building, A rents out the building to B. B, who is the tenant, now partitions the building into rooms, put tenants in different places. Now, B, who is the tenant, is collecting rent from the other people.
D, E, F, G.
Good. But he's not remitting those rents to his landlord. Now, the landlord says, where's my rent? Where's my rent? The landlord now goes to recover possession from B, gets judgments against B, and then comes to enforce the judgment to eject the tenant and even to eject the tenant. And then the tenant say, oh, I paid rent yesterday. We had a situation last week where something like that was done. The tenant say, I paid 500,000 last week. I paid 1 million last week. But your landlord, who is a tenant, did not get the consent, may not have gotten the consent of his landlord. And two, may have exceeded the scope. So if, for instance, he has a 1-year tenancy, okay, which is expiring in 6 months, and A does not have an intention of renewing that rent, he now gives you a term of 1 year, exceeding his residuary interest. You find out that it creates a lot of confusion. So that is why you put those things in writing, so that the tenant knows his limits. The landlord also knows his limits. But generally, let me just say this, that the law presumes that a landlord-tenancy relationship is not an equal level relationship. The law presumes that the landlord has a stronger bargaining power over the tenant. So what the law does is that it provides protection, okay, for the tenant. Okay, for instance, a landlord cannot...
That is becoming an interesting topic and discussion.
Yes.
But we're going to continue after we come back from break.
All right.
Please do join us again. Hi, you're welcome to this episode of The Speaker on SNN Television. On today's episode, we are going to be asking a pertinent question to all Nigerians on whether we are selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria. My name is Anozechi Lobso. The word sale got to do with free or easy movement or passage of ship or vessel in a sea or uninterrupted soaring or flying of an aircraft. This simply means that sailing is an unobstructed progress in which anybody can succeed and move forward in life. On the other hand, selling is a transfer of the whole interest, possession, and ownership of goods or commodity to another for a valuable consideration. From the two definitions, it could be seen that the general mindset and objective view of selling is to move forward in progress, while that of selling is in retrospectivity. There is no doubt whatsoever that Nigeria is blessed in all ramifications. In natural resources, Nigeria is blessed. In intelligence, Nigeria is blessed. In men and women of honor, Nigeria is blessed. But in all these good virtues that Nigeria has as a country, I'm persuaded to ask on whether we are selling Nigeria or we are selling Nigeria. Nigeria is one of the largest producers of oil in the world, and yet people are dying in hunger on a daily basis. People are killing each other for nothing. Few days ago, there was a pathetic communion clash in Cross River State where lives and properties were lost. May God save our country. I have no doubt in my mind that the cause of all this is the type of leadership we have. We have political leaders that sit down and do absolutely nothing, only to be feeding farts with taxpayers' money. You that defend and speak in favor of politicians, even when you know that of a truth, that politician is not doing well at all, are you selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria? You that continue to increase the electricity tariff in spite of the challenges in this pandemic, are you selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria? You that is using the second wave of COVID-19 to enrich yourself and your household, are you selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria? You that engage yourself in grafts, are you selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria? You that contract the Chinese to build railways and renovate airports, while we have dockets of construction companies and engineers here in Nigeria, are you selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria? You that is set to import COVID-19 vaccine and ready to impose it on Nigerians, while you are aware of the various reports that a vaccine could be dangerous to human health, are you selling Nigeria or selling Nigeria? Looking at all this, you will agree with me that the cause of this problem is corruption. Corruption in the government, corruption in the private sector, corruption in the church, corruption in the mosque, corruption in the temple, corruption in the shrine, corruption everywhere. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. This high level of corruption have made our political and politicians and government officials to remain docile and the base of positive initiative. They do not work at least to produce and introduce good policies and decisions that can move Nigeria forward. Our leaders must apply efforts in things that require efforts. Our leaders must not allow themselves to think that without any efforts, we can get the things we desire as a country without work. We must work. There is no voodoo economics. There is no abracadabra, lo and behold, manna is falling down from heaven. We must remind ourselves that the divine instruction is by the sweat of thy brow. Oh, it's not lost on me that I'm an Anglican clergyman. It's not lost on me that even if we want to be spiritual about all these things, we must have clarity of mind. Oh, dear compatriots, is it not God who said through Elijah, do not waver between two opinions. Choose you now whom you shall serve. Is it not the same God who through Joshua said, choose you now whether you want to serve the gods of the Amorites or the Lord God. As for me and my house, I shall serve the Lord. I am saying that one of the ways in which we serve God is by engaging in honest and productive labor. I therefore speak that until our political leaders disengage themselves in graft and primitive accumulation, and all of us say no to corruption, do that which is good and right, build a nation through productive and honest labor, in order to achieve our desired goal as a nation, we shall continue to be selling Nigeria instead of selling Nigeria. My name is Anozie Chinomso. I just want to speak. Glad to know that you are there. We are still here in the studio with Barrister Obinna Onya. In terms of this relationship of landlord and tenant, is there any privilege and right that each of them has? Because I look at the situation by which a landlord will say, Obinna, I don't like your face, leave this place. And he will tell you that after it's not 1 year certain, it's 6 months, you are paying everyone 1 month. And you are not prepared. He now say you have to leave. After all, you paid me January and you are leaving. They say, but it's every month I'm paying. You say, no, leave. What is the position of law in that second? What are the rights and privileges of landlord and tenant?
Okay, so to answer this question, I have to first define the different types of tenancy relationship. Okay. So there's a tenancy relationship called a fixed tenancy. It's a tenancy for a fixed term. Or it's also called a term for a term setting. So you have a 1 year tenancy, fixed, 1 year, not renewable. But it's certain.
What do you mean not renewable? Not renewable?
That is, the agreement does not contemplate renewal.
So once it ends that 1 year, it ends.
It ends. Then a fresh agreement
have to be drafted.
Yes. So it's called term setting. Now landlords usually prefer it because of the issues of notice. Now when a tenancy is for a term setting, at the end of that term, it expires, the tenant should leave. But when the tenant now pays rent again with the consent of the landlord, another term setting.
That's often that you see an agreement say 1 year setting.
So that way the tenant, it's easier to take care of the issues of notices. Then there's periodic tenancy. That one is maybe yearly, 6 months. That way the tenant, as long as he's paying his rent, the rent is running. Now in those circumstances, the law will again say subject to the agreement of the parties.
The agreement is the key.
So the law says where parties agree on the duration of notice, when a landlord does not want to continue a tenancy relationship, he's supposed to serve notices to the tenant. What kind of notices is he supposed to serve? If it's a yearly tenancy, the law will say if the parties do not agree otherwise, then a yearly tenancy is entitled to 6 months notice. A 6 months tenancy is entitled to 1 month notice, and on and on. That is where it's a yearly tenancy. But that provision can only apply where there is no provision in the contract, in the tenancy agreement. That is 1. 2. But people will now construe this to automatically mean that you must be entitled to 6 months if you're paying your rent yearly. It doesn't really follow that way.
If the landlord wants to evict me for whatever reason, maybe he doesn't want me, not that I've defaulted, but Obinna, no, so I don't like your face. When is he going to serve me quick notice?
So it's I have to break this scenario down because this is where it all gets mixed up. The starting point is that the scenario you used was a fixed tenancy.
1 year certain.
1 year certain. It means that term setting has expired. So all the tenant is entitled to is what we call a 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover possession.
So I am not entitled for 6 months quick notice?
No, nothing. Because the tenancy was for a term setting.
So when is it that I have the right for 6 months notice?
Good. So if the tenancy is a periodic tenancy, so you pay every January. So every January you pay your rent. Now, you're paying as at when due.
As at when due, yes. It's periodic.
Then the landlord must give you that notice 6 months before the expiration
of the following year.
Of the following year, yes.
So if in that circumstance he's supposed to serve me the quick notice in June last year.
Good.
June 2020.
June or July.
July 2020.
Yes. Good. That's what he's supposed to do. If not, the notice is defective. However, this is where they mix it up again. That is on the presupposition that the tenant is not in arrears of rent. So you cannot be owing rent.
And you are explaining this now?
Yes. You cannot be owing rent
of previous years.
And be talking about statutory notices. Because the basis of the tenancy relationship is rent. So once a tenant is in default of rent, he becomes a tenant at will.
Let's use another scenario.
Yes.
It's a periodic one now.
Yes.
And I've been owing the landlord since 2019.
Good.
I was owing maybe,
Good.
no matter how fraction, even if it's 1 naira.
You have not completed
that one.
that term.
Yes. Then 2020.
Yes.
He decided to sell. He said I should leave.
Yes.
Won't I demand that 6 months?
No, you cannot be entitled to the 6 months
Because I've been in default.
Yes. The law is that what the basis of a tenancy relationship is rent. Okay, so you cannot be not performing your part of the bargain, and then want the landlord to continue or to want to, the tenancy relationship to continue. In that case, what the law requires is that the tenant is served 7 days notice of owner's intention to recover possession of premises. Now, that 7 days notice does not mean the tenant will leave upon the expiration of the 7 days notice. No, the law now insists that there's a procedure for recovery of premises, and the law abhors self-help. Okay? And the law does not. In fact, there are some jurisdictions where the landlord will go and cut the lights or go and remove the roof, and all. You can't do that. If a landlord does that and is taken to court, the landlord will pay punitive costs. We pay punitive damages. Okay, the law does not allow it.
So, what are the steps now the landlord will use to recover his premises as
excellent.
a defaulting tenant?
Excellent. So, upon the service of the 7 days notice of owner's intention,
yes,
the tenancy relationship ceases.
Please, before you go, just in a quick one, who gets that 7 days notice? Is it in the court, or is it with the landlord and tenant, or landlord alone can get it? Where does he get it?
Now,
because you can see in some matter, somebody will just serve something, will just put something one high court, and what is the validity? How do we tell our viewers that this is the right one?
Yes, so there's no hard and fast rule, or there's no in FCT.
Yes,
there's no form. There is actually. There is a template of the FCT judiciary where you can fill the form out, okay, and serve on the tenant. Okay. That is one. The landlord also can, by letter, okay, either from the landlord himself or from his attorney, okay, do a notice. It's like a letter, but the most important thing is the content, okay. Take notice that your landlord, blah blah blah,
and it stands.
Yes, that's it. And in some jurisdictions, I think in some states, they usually like to file it in court so that it has some semblance of the weight of law. But no, that's not a requirement of law. Okay. As long as it is the content, the requisite content of the notice is present, it suffices.
When you serve that 7 days intention and the tenant decide not to leave, what will the landlord do?
Good. So, the landlord will now have to proceed to court to recover possession. So he can, depending on the monetary, how much the annual rent of the property is. The monetary jurisdiction in the FCT, I think, is from 5 or 6 million, I think. Okay. I think it's 5 or 6 million, I'm not sure of it.
Okay.
But if it's above, I think if above 5 or 6 million, you go to the High Court. If it's below 5 or 6 million, annual rent. So even if the tenant is owing 5 years, put together, as long as the annual rent is within the monetary jurisdiction of the magistrate court, you proceed to the magistrate court. If it exceeds the monetary jurisdiction of the magistrate court, you now proceed to the High Court. In the High Court, you file a writ of summons. In the magistrate court, you file a.
So the issue of landlord boxing the tenant does not arise.
No. It's self-help. It's self-help, and the law abhors self-help. We've gone at the days when might was right. So because the landlord has money, he'll go to the police and get the police to, or if you don't do that, you proceed in a civilized manner, go to court. Yes, it may take some time, but you have to get an order.
Thank you. In fact, Counsel, we're going to bring you back again to explain certain of all those things, like the jurisdiction, the right court the person has to go, and some of the rights and privileges of that of a tenant, and of course that of the landlord. We want to appreciate you so much for coming, and we pray that next time we call you, you also are going to oblige us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Viewers, you have it there from Barrister Nonya on the tenants and the relationship, all between that of the tenant and the landlord, and I know that you have gotten something from there. It is a common knowledge that one desires to own a property or properties, as the case may be. When you own a property, you have automatically become a landlord, or when you are being given authority to do something on that property. And when you are on lease, you are a tenant. It is therefore advised that as at the time of creating a tenancy agreement, The parties must endeavor to ensure that there is a well-worded legal document that spells out the covenants, terms, and conditions of the agreement, and not just an oral agreement which may not be sufficient, evident, or makes it hard to be enforceable. This is because the faintest ink is greater than the loudest voice. This is where we draw the curtain on today's episode of Justify Nigeria. Join us same time, same station on another fresh episode of the program. Until then, this is Anozechi Nomso, wishing you the very best, and bye for now.